Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. I just realized I'm setting a little low here. Let's fix that now before we get too into stuff. That should be better. Anyways, welcome to Fireside Fairytales. My name is Rory, and you are watching Varietal Literature's YouTube channel. Hopefully all the sound and everything's coming through just fine. We're going to read 3 stories tonight, all of them from the book Mighty Mikko, a book of Finnish folktales, fairytales and folktales, rather. And if you're wondering why I seem a little discombobulated, I've spent the entire day pretending to be a little cat in a wonderful video game, and as has about half the living world who plays video games, and, you know, now I have to get used to these undexterous arms and body. The theme tonight is just basically I read some stories over the last few weeks that I was like, this one's a little dark, I'm not putting this one in. This one's a little dark, I'm not putting this one in. And so I've come up with 2 stories that I think are good. They're just... they just have elements of darkness in them. Like, I don't want to oversell it. Like, we're not talking about like a horror show episode here. But it's a matter of like, part of what's so creepy is they really don't think there's a big problem with it. But I do need to give you a bit of a content warning going into this. There is some animal abuse in these stories that they just don't really follow up on in any serious way. And there is some very sort of weird viewpoints on the world that are taken for granted, but that's pretty typical. So you make your call if you want to do it. If you want to stick around and watch the rest, that's fine. Obviously, I got enough out of them, but just be aware. Also, you should know that if you are not watching this live, down in the description there will be little timestamps, and we're going to read maybe 3 stories. We're going to see how it's pretty warm here, so we're going to see how the temperature goes, and we're going to see how the time goes. But the first 2 stories are dark, and the last one's a little more lighthearted. So the GS has just warned us right before the animal abuse. It is core to the first half of the first story. You'll know it when you hear it. Make your call. The first story we're going to read is The Little Sister, which has just this craziest premises in it to begin with from the opening, and then it just gets stranger as it goes on. The second one we're going to read is called The Terrible Olli, which is a lot more fun, though still kind of grim, and it's like, who's right here? Is it really the hero? And then finally, if we have time, we'll read The Enchanted Grouse, which doesn't particularly have anything too disturbing about it, which is kind of why I'm putting it as a palate cleanser at the end. But there you go. My warning's out of the way. If you are not watching this live, you may want to skip the first story. The other ones don't really have anything too questionable, just dark. This is called The Little Sister from Mighty Mikko, a book of Finnish fairy tales and folk tales, and it does involve a premise of some animal abuse, so be aware. Now, this is the story of Suyatar and the 9 brothers. So, just as a note before we go into it, Suyatar was featured in one of our stories last week. As far as I know, it is a sort of Finnish troll wicked woman who was known to go around and just simply create chaos for the sake of it. Just a kind of chaotic evil presence in the land. And obviously the villain of the piece. There was once a woman who had 9 sons. They were good boys and loved her dearly, but there was one thing about which they were always complaining. "Why haven't we a little sister?" they kept asking. "Do give us a little sister." And when the time came that another child was to be born, they said to their mother, "If the baby is a boy, then we are going away. You will never see us again. But if it is a little girl, then we shall stay home and take care of it." The mother agreed that if the child were a girl, she would have her husband put a spindle outside of the gatepost, and if it were a boy, an axe. "Just wait," she said, "and see what your father puts on the gatepost, and then you will know whether it is another brother God has sent you, or a little sister." Already, I hope everyone is like, what? They're going to abandon their mother? She gives birth to a boy? Just wait. The baby turned out to be a girl. The mother was overjoyed. "Hurry, husband," she cried, "and put a spindle on the gatepost so that our 9 sons may know the good news." The man did so and then quickly returned to the mother and baby. The moment he was gone, Suyatar slipped up and changed the tokens. She took away the spindle and put in its place the axe. Then, with an evil grin, she hurried off, mumbling to herself, "Now we'll see what we'll see." She hoped to bring trouble and grief, and she succeeded. As soon as the 9 sons saw the axe on the gatepost, they thought their mother had given birth to another son, and at once they left home, vowing never to return. Poor mother waited for them, and waited. And I'd like to point out that in that time, if your children abandoned you, that was your RRSP, that was your retirement plan, your 401k, like that was it. "What is keeping my sons?" she cried at last. "Go out to the gate, husband, and see if they are coming." The man went out and soon returned, bringing back word that someone had changed the tokens. "The spindle that I put on the gatepost is gone," he said, "and in its place is an axe." "Alas," cried poor mother, "some evil creature has done this to spite us. Oh, if we could only get word to our sons of the little sister they were so eager to have." But there was no way to reach them, for no one knew which way they had gone. In a short time, the husband died, and the poor... I like that. Sorry. I just like in these stories when they're like, this person has served their purpose. He died off screen. Doesn't matter. He's gone. Right? Like, God, I wish I could write like that as a writer. If I could just be like, I'm done with this character now. He died off screen. And like nobody would question it. In a short time, the husband died, and the poor woman, abandoned by her 9 sons, had only her little daughter left. She named the child Cartru, and Cartru was a dear little girl. Her face was as beautiful as her heart was good. Whenever she found her mother weeping alone, she tried to comfort her, and as she grew older, she wanted to know the cause of her mother's grief. At last, the mother told her about her 9 brothers, about how they'd gone away, never to return, owing to the trick of some evil creature. "My poor mother," she cried, "how sorry I am that I am the innocent cause of your loss. Let me go out into the world and find my brothers. When once they hear the truth, they will gladly come home to care for you in your old age." At first, the mother would not consent to this. "You are all I have," she said, "and I should indeed be miserable and lonely if anything happened to you." But Cartru continued to weep every time she thought of her poor brothers driven unnecessarily from their home. And at last, the mother, realizing that she would never more be happy unless she were allowed to go in search of them, gave up opposing her. "Very well, my daughter. You may go, and may God go with you, and bring you safely back to me. But before you go, I must prepare you a bag of food for the journey, and bake you a magic cake that will show you the way." So she baked a batch of bread, and at the same time mixed a little round cake with Gertrude's own tears, and baked it too. Then she said, "Here now, my child, are provisions for the journey, and here is a magic cake that will lead you to your brothers. All you have to do is throw it down in front of you and say, 'Roll, roll, my little cake. Show me the way I must take. to find at last brothers 9, whose own true mother is also mine. Just want to say, if you could make that cake, why didn't you use it 16 years ago? Then the little cake will start rolling, and do you follow wherever it rolls. But Gertrude, her child, Gertrude, my child, you must not start out alone. You must have some friend or companion with you. Now it happened that Gertrude had a little dog, Musty, that she loved dearly. I'll take Musty with me, she said. Musty will protect me. And she called, and Musty wagged his tail and barked with joy at the prospect of going into the world with his mistress. Then Gertrude threw down the magic cake in front of her and sang, Roll, roll, my little cake, show me the way I must take, to find at last the brothers 9, whose own true mother is also mine. At once the cake rolled off like a little wheel, and Gertrude and Musty followed it. They walked until they were tired. Then Gertrude picked up the little cake and they rested by the wayside. When they were ready again to start the cake a-rolling, all Gertrude had to do was throw it down in front of her and say the magic rhyme. Their first day was without adventure. When night came, they ate their supper and went to sleep in a field under a tree. The second day, they overtook an old ugly woman whom Gertrude disliked on sight, but said to herself, Shame on you, Gertrude, not liking this woman just 'cause she's old and ugly. And she made herself answer the old woman's greetings politely, and she made Musty stop snarling and growling. The old hag asked Gertrude who she was and where she was going, and Gertrude told her. Ah, said the old woman, how unfortunate that we have met each other. How fortunate that we have met each other, for our way lies together. She smiled and petted Gertrude's arm, and Gertrude felt like shuddering. But she restrained herself and told herself severely, You're a wicked girl not to feel more friendly to the poor old thing. Musty felt much as Gertrude did. He no longer growled, for Gertrude had told him to stop, but he dropped his tail between his legs, and pressing up close to Gertrude, he trembled with fright. And well he might too, for the old hag was none other than Suyatar, who had been waiting all these years just for this very chance to do further injury to Gertrude and her brothers. Gertrude, poor child, was, alas, too good and innocent to suspect evil in others. She said to Suyatar, Very well, if our ways lie together, then we can be companions. So Suyatar joined Gertrude and Musty, and the three of them walked on, following the little cake. As the day advanced, the sun grew hotter and hotter, and at last they reached a lake. Suyatar said, My dear, let us sit down here for a few moments and rest. They all sat down, and Suyatar said, Let us go bathing in the lake. That will refresh us. Gertrude would have agreed if Musty had not tugged at her skirts and warned her not to. Don't do it, dear mistress, Musty growled softly. Don't go bathing with her. She'll bewitch you. So Gertrude said, No, I don't want to go in bathing. Suyatar waited until they were again journeying. Dog abuse incoming. When Gertrude wasn't looking, she turned around and kicked Musty and broke one of the poor little dog's legs. Thereafter, Musty had to hop along on 3 legs. The next afternoon, when they passed another lake, Suyatar tried again to tempt Gertrude into the water. The sun is very hot, she said. It will refresh us both to bathe. Come, Gertrude, my dear, don't refuse me this time. But again Musty tugged at Gertrude's skirts, and licking her hand whispered the warning, Don't do it, dear mistress. Don't go in bathing with her. She will bewitch you. So again Gertrude said politely, No, I I don't feel like going and bathing. You go in alone and I'll wait for you here. But this was not what Suyatar wanted, and she said no, she didn't care to go in alone. She was furious too, with Musty, and later, when Kurtru wasn't looking, she gave the poor old dog a kick that broke another leg. Thereafter, Musty had to hop along on 2 legs. They slept the 3rd night by the wayside, and the next day they went on again, always following the magic cake. In mid-afternoon, they passed a lake, and Suyatar said, "Surely, my dear, you must be tired and hot. Let us both bathe in this cool lake." But Musty, hopping painfully along on 2 legs, yelped weakly and said to Kurtru, "Don't do it, mistress. Don't go in bathing with her, or she'll bewitch you. For the love of God, please learn something." So for a 3rd time, Kurtru refused, and later, when she wasn't looking, Suyatar kicked Musty and broke the 3rd of the poor little dog's legs. Thereafter, Musty hopped along as best he could on only 1 leg. Can, she not carry him? Well, they went on and on. When night came, they slept by the roadside, and then next morning they started on again. The sun grew hot, and by mid-afternoon, Kurtru was tired and ready to rest. When they reached a lake, Suyatar again begged that they both go in bathing. Kurtru was tempted to agree when poor Musty threw himself panting at her feet and whimpered, "Don't do it, dear mistress. Don't go in bathing with her, or she'll bewitch you." So Kurtru again refused. "That's right, dear mistress," Musty panted. "Don't do it. I shall soon be dead. I know, for she hates me, but before I die, I want to warn you one last time, never to go in bathing, or she will bewitch you." "What's that dog saying?" Suyatar demanded angrily. Without waiting for an answer, she picked up a heavy piece of wood and struck poor Musty with such a blow on the head that it killed him. As far as I can tell as well, in front of her. This girl, you're supposed to feel bad for, honestly, at this point in the story. You get what you deserve. "Don't mind him, my dear," Suyatar said. "He was sick and lame, and it was better to put him out of his misery." Suyatar tried to soothe Kurtru and make her forget Musty, but all afternoon Kurtru wept to think she would never again see her faithful little friend, who apparently she didn't notice had 3 broken legs. The next afternoon, when Suyatar begged her to go in bathing, there was no Musty to warn her against it, and at last Kurtru allowed herself to be persuaded. She was tired from her many days wandering, and it was true that the first touch of cool water refreshed her. "Musty, you died for nothing." "Now splash water in my face," Suyatar cried, but Kurtru didn't want to splash water into Suyatar's face, for she supposed Suyatar was an old woman, and she thought it would be disrespectful to splash water into the face of an old woman. "Do you hear me?" screamed Suyatar. When Kurtru still hesitated, Suyatar looked at her with such a terrible and threatening expression that Kurtru did as she was bidden. Of course she did. She splashed water into Suyatar's face, and as the water touched Suyatar's eyes, Suyatar cried out, "Your bonny looks give up to me, and you take mine for all to see." Instantly, the two changed appearances. Suyatar looked young and beautiful like Kurtru, and Kurtru changed to a hideous old hag. Then, too late, she realized that the awful old woman to whom she'd been so polite was Suyatar. Which is why, of course, the moral of the story is don't be polite to the old. Yeah, there you go. That's it. That's the end. No, it's not. But I kind of want it to be. That's just screw her. "Oh, why?" Kurtru cried. "Why didn't I heed poor Musty's warning?" Says everybody out there as well. Suyatar dragged her roughly out of the water. "Come along," she said. "Dress yourself in those rags of mine and start the cake a-rollin'. We ought to reach your brother's house by tonight." So poor Kurtru had to dress herself in Suyatar's filthy old garments, while Suyatar, looking like a fresh young girl, decked herself out in Kurtru's pretty bodice and skirt. Unwillingly now, and with a heavy heart, Kurtru threw down the cake and said, "Roll, roll, my little cake, show me the way I must take, to find at last the brothers 9, whose own true mother is also mine." And off rolled the little cake, and they too followed it. Kurtru wept, weeping bitterly, and Suyatar taunting her with her ugly laughs. Then suddenly Kurtru forgot to weep, for Suyatar took her memory and her tongue. Not her literal tongue, like just her ability to speak. The little cake led them at last to a farmhouse, before which it stopped. This was where the 9 brothers were living. 8 of them were out working in the fields, but the youngest was at home. He opened the door, and when Suyatar told him he was Kurtru, his sister, he kissed her tenderly and made her welcome. Then he invited her inside, and they sat side by side on the bench and talked, and Suyatar told him all she had heard from Kurtru about his mother and about the tokens which had been changed at Kurtru's birth. The youngest brother listened eagerly, and Suyatar told her story so glibly that of course he supposed that she was his own true sister. This whole family's a group of morons. "And who is the awful-looking old hag that has come with you?" he asked, pointing at Kurtru. "That? Oh, that's an old serving woman, whom our mother sent with me to bear me company. She's dumb and foolish, but she's a good herd, and we let her drive the cow out to pasture every day." The older brothers, when they came home, were greatly pleased to find what they thought was their sister. They began to love her at once and to pet her. I don't know. And they said that now she must stay with them and keep house for them. Yay! She told them that was what she wanted to do, and she said that now she was here, the youngest brother need no longer stay at home, but could go out every morning with the rest of them to work in the fields. So now began a new life for poor Kurtru. In the morning, after the brothers were gone, Suyatar would scold and abuse her. She would bake a cake for her dinner to be eaten in the fields, and she would fill the cake with stones and stick and filth. Then she would take Kurtru as far as the gate, where she would give her back her tongue and her memory, and order her roughly to drive the cow to pasture and look after it all day long. In the late afternoon, when Kurtru drove home the cow, Suyatar would meet her at the gate and take from her own tongue and her memory, and then in the evening the brothers would see her as a foolish old woman who couldn't talk. Every morning and every evening, Kurtru begged Suyatar to show her a little mercy, but far from showing her any mercy, Suyatar grew more cruel from day to day. Suyatar was very proud to think that 9 handsome young men took her for a beautiful girl, and she felt sure they would never find out their mistake, for only Kurtru knew who she really was, and Kurtru was entirely in her power. At night, seated in the shadow in a far corner of the kitchen with her 9 brothers laughing and talking, Kurtru felt no sorrow, for at such times, of course, she had no memory. But during the day it was different. Then, when she was alone in the meadow, she had her memory in her tongue, and she thought about her poor mother at home, anxiously awaiting her return. And she thought of her 9 sturdy brothers, all of whom might now through her mistake fall victims to Suyatar. These thoughts made her weep with grief, and as the days went by, she put this grief into a song, which she sang constantly. "I found at last the brothers 9, whose own true mother is also mine, but they know me not from stick or stone. They leave me here to weep alone. Well, Suyatar sits in my place with stolen looks and stolen face. She snared me first with evil guile, and now she mocks me all the while. By night she takes my tongue away. She feeds me sticks and stones by day. And oh, little they guess, the brothers 9, that their own true mother is also mine. The brothers, as they worked in nearby fields, used to hear the song, and they wondered about it. Pardon me, water break. Strange, they said to one another. Can it be the old woman singing? In the evening at home she never opens her mouth, and our dear sister always says that she's dumb and foolish. One afternoon, when Gertrude's song sounded particularly sad, the youngest brother crept close to the meadow where Gertrude was sitting in order to hear the words. He listened carefully and then hurried back to the others with frightened face and told them what he had heard. Nonsense, the older brothers said. That can't be so. However, they too wanted to hear for themselves the words of the strange song, so they all crept nearer to listen. It looked like an old hag who was singing, but the voice came out of the withered mouth was the voice of a young girl, and as they listened they too grew pale. I found at last the brothers 9, whose own true mother is also mine. But they know me not from stick or stone. They leave me here to weep alone, while Suyatar sits in my place with stolen looks and stolen face. She snared me first with evil guile, and now she mocks me all the while. By night she takes my tongue away, she feeds me sticks and stones by day. Oh, little they guess, the brothers 9, that their own true mother is also mine. Can it be true? They said, whispering together. They sent the youngest brother to... Can it be true? No, this woman just made up a song that perfectly describes your situation. It's just a coincidence. Good thinking. God, these brothers. They sent the youngest brother to question Gertrude, and he, when he had heard her story, believed it true. Then the other brothers went to her one by one and questioned her, and finally they were all convinced of the truth of her story. It is well for us, they said, if we do not fall into the power of that awful creature. How, oh how can we rescue our poor little sister? I can never get back my own looks, Gertrude said, unless Suyatar splashes water into my eyes, and unless I cry out a magic rhyme as she does it. The brothers discussed one plan after another, and at last agreed on what they thought might deceive Suyatar. They had Gertrude inflame her eyes with dust, then come groping home one midday. The brothers too were at home, and as Gertrude came stumbling into the kitchen, they said to Suyatar, "Oh, sister, sister, see the poor old woman. Something ails her. Her eyes, they're all red and swollen. Get some water and bathe them." "Nonsense," Suyatar said. "The old hag's well enough. Let her be. She doesn't need any attention." "Oh, sister," the youngest brother said reproachfully, "is that any way for a human, kind-hearted girl like you to talk? If you won't bathe that old creature's eyes, I will myself." Then Suyatar, of course, wanted them to think she was a human. Kind-hearted girl said nah, she would bathe them. She took a basin of water over to Gertrude and told her to lean down her head, and she splashed the first drop of water into Gertrude's eyes, and Gertrude cried out, "My own true looks give back to me, and take your own for all to see." Instantly, Suyatar was again a hideous old hag, though still dressed in Gertrude's pretty bodice and skirt. And Gertrude was herself again, young and fresh and sweet, though still encased in Suyatar's rags. But the brothers pretended that they saw no difference, and kept on talking to Suyatar as though they still thought her Gertrude. And Suyatar, because her eyes were blinded with the dust, supposed that they were still deceived. Then one of the brothers said to Suyatar, "Sister, sister, the sauna is all heated and ready. Don't you want to bathe?" Suyatar thought that this would be a fine chance to wash the dust from her eyes, and so she let them lead her to the sauna. And when they got her inside, they locked the door and set the sauna on fire. Oh, the noise she made then when she found she'd been trapped. She kicked and screamed and cursed and threatened, but Gertrude and the brothers paid no heed to her. They left her burning in the sauna while they hurried homewards. They found their poor old mother seated at the window weeping, for she thought that now Gertrude, as well as her sons, were lost forever. But as Gertrude and the 9 handsome young men came in the gate, she didn't recognize them until Gertrude sang at last, "I bring at last my brothers 9, whose own true mother is also mine." And then she knew who they were, and with thanks to God, she welcomed them home. So, here's what I particularly like about this story. There's a lot of layers of like, wow, that's pretty dark. There's the slowly killing a dog. That's pretty dark. There's the abandonment of your mother because she didn't control the gender of the child. That's pretty dark. There's Suyatar just being unbelievably cruel, which I guess is kind of in character with Suyatar. Some car revving up. But then there's no like trick really in the end. Like when I first read it, I don't know about you. When I first read it, I was like, oh, what are they going to do? Like trap her and then the sauna's going to like steam her and then she can't do something as she used to, or like everyone will know who she is now. No, they literally just burn her. Like they could have just thrown her in a pit and burned her. Like it didn't have to be a sauna. I guess I normally there's some creativity to it, but they just murdered a person. Oh, a user I'm not terribly familiar with. Fuar? I may be mispronouncing that. Says, R.I.P. dog. Yes, Musty. Our heart breaks. Okay, so the next one is not as terrible. But it's still a little dark. And I guess you get a sense of what I mean by dark. Like the story itself, I see that Gia says, oh, a happy ending. Yeah, I mean, there are happy endings. And I don't want to give the impression that what I mean by dark is it's an unhappy ending. It's that like events in the story happen that I think would normally happen in like a horror film, to be honest. So this is a fairly normal standard fairy tale, although it's premised on the idea that the Finnish people are owed something that other things are not, which is its own darkness. But it's premised on that idea. But the last act of this is a horror movie, to be completely honest, where we are with the killer, who is the protagonist. So this is called The Terrible Olli, from Mighty Mikko, a book of Finnish fairy tales and folk tales. The story of an honest Finn and a wicked troll. The Terrible Olli. There was once a wicked rich old troll who lived on a mountain that sloped down to a bay. A decent Finn, a farmer, lived on the opposite side of the bay. The farmer had 3 sons. When the boys had reached manhood, he said to them one day, "I should think it would shame you 3 strong young youths that the wicked old troll over there should live on year after year and no one trouble him. We work hard like honest Finns and are as poor at the end of the year as at the beginning. That old troll with all his wickedness grows richer and richer. I tell you, if you boys had any real spirit, you'd take his riches from him and drive him away." Which begs the question, why didn't you, Dad? His youngest son, whose name was Olli, at once cried out, "Very well, father, I will." But the 2 older sons, offended at Olli's promptness, declared, "You'll do no such thing. Don't forget your place in the family. You're the youngest, and we're not going to let you push us aside. Now, father, We too will go across the bay and rout out that old troll. Olli may come with us if he likes and watch us while we do it." Olli laughed and said, "All right," for he was used to his brothers treating him like a baby. So in a few days, the three brothers walked around the bay and up the mountain and presented themselves at the troll's house. The troll and his old wife were both at home. They received the brothers with great civility. "You're the sons of Finns who live across the bay, aren't you?" the troll said. "I've watched you boys grow up. I'm certainly glad to see you, for I have 3 daughters who need husbands. Marry my daughters and you'll inherit my riches." The old troll made this offer in order to get the young men into his power. "Be careful," Olli whispered, but the brothers were too delighted at the prospect of inheriting the troll's riches so easily to pay any heed to Olli's warning, and instead they accepted the troll's offer at once. Because remember, no fairy tale works unless everyone's an idiot. But the brothers were too delighted at the prospect of inheriting... Well, the old troll's wife made them a fine supper, and after supper the troll sent them to bed with his 3 daughters, which, I'm not gonna lie, seems a little short. You know, we just agreed on this. Anyways. But first he put red caps on the 3 youths and white caps on the 3 troll girls. He made a joke about the caps. "A red cap and a white cap in each bed," he said. The older brother suspected nothing and soon fell asleep. Olli too pretended to fall asleep, and when he was sure that none of the troll girls were still awake, he got up and quietly changed the caps. Then he crept back to bed and waited. Presently the old troll came over to the beds with a long knife in his hands. There was so little light in the room that he couldn't see the faces of the sleepers, but it was easy enough to distinguish the white caps from the red caps, and with 3 swift blows... Oh, well, I think you know where this is going. He cut the heads off of the 3 Finnish youths. Or, thinking, of course, he had cut the heads off. Then he went back to the bed with the old troll wife, and Olli could hear them both chuckling and laughing, and after a time they went soundly to sleep. As Olli could hear them both... and after a time... The heat is getting to me, is what's happening here. If you're wondering why are the wheels coming off, Rory. They went soundly to sleep, as Olli could tell from their regular deep breathing and their loud snores. Olli now roused his brothers and told them what had happened with the 3 of them, and slipped quietly out of the troll house and hurried home to their father on the other side of the bay. After that, the older brothers no longer talked of despoiling the troll. They didn't care to try another encounter with him. "He might have cut off our heads," they said, shuddering to think of the awful risk they'd run. Olli laughed at them. "Come on," he kept saying to them day after day. "Let's go across the bay to the trolls." "We'll do no such thing," they told him, "and you wouldn't suggest it either if you weren't so young and foolish." "Well," Olli announced at last, "if you won't come with me, I'm going alone. I've heard that troll has a horse with hairs of gold and silver. I've decided I want that horse." "Olli," his father said, "I don't believe you ought to go. You know what your brothers say, that troll is an awfully sly one." But Olli only laughed. "Goodbye," he called back as he waved his hand. "When you see me again, I'll be riding the troll's horse." By the way, Olli has got to be one of my favorite characters I've ever encountered in these. The troll wasn't at home, but the old troll wife was there, and when she saw Olli, she thought to herself, "Mercy me, here's that Finnish boy again, the one that changed the caps. What shall I do? I must keep him here on some pretext or other until the troll comes home." Then she pretended to be very glad to see him. "Why, Olli," she said, "is that you? Come right in." She talked to him as long as she could, and when she could think of nothing more to say, she asked would he take the horse and water it at the lake? That will keep him busy, she thought to herself, and long before he gets back from the lake, the troll will be here. But Olli, of course, instead of leading the horse down to the lake, jumped on its back and galloped away. By the time the troll reached home, he was safely on the other side of the bay. Olli was safely on the other side of the bay. When the troll heard from the old troll wife what had happened, he went down to the shore and hallooed across the bay. "Olli! Oh, Olli! Are you there?" Olli made a trumpet of his hands and called back, "Yes, I'm here." "Have you got my horse, Olli?" "Yes, I've got your horse, but it's my horse now." "Olli! Olli!" his father cried. "You mustn't talk that way to the troll. You'll make him angry." And his brothers, looking with envy at the horse with gold and silver hairs, warned him sourly. "You better be careful, young man, or the troll will get you yet." But a few days later, Olli announced, "I think I'll go over and get the troll's money bag." His father tried to dissuade him. "Don't be foolhardy, Olli. Your brothers say you had better not go to the troll's house again." But Olli only laughed and started gaily off as though he hadn't a fear in the world. Again he found the old troll wife alone. "Mercy me," she thought to herself as she saw him coming. "Here's that terrible Olli again. Whatever shall I do? I mustn't let him off this time before the troll gets back. I must keep him right here in the house." So when he came in, she pretended she was tired and that her back ached, and she asked him, would he watch the bread in the oven while she rested a few moments on the bed? "Certainly I will," Olli said. So the old troll wife lay down on the bed, and Olli sat quietly in front of the oven. The troll wife really was tired, and before she knew it, she fell asleep. "Ha!" thought Olli. "Here's my chance." Without disturbing the troll's wife, he reached under the bed, pulled out the big money bag full of silver pieces, threw it over his shoulder, and hurried home. He was measuring the money when he heard the troll hallooing across to him. "Olli! Oh, Olli, are you there?" "Yes," Olli shouted back. "I'm here. What do you want?" "Olli, have you got my money bag?" "Yes, I've got your money bag, but it's my money bag now." Well, a few days later, Olli said, "Do you know that troll has a beautiful coverlet woven of silk and gold?" This is like what you put over beds, if you don't know what a coverlet is. "I think I'll go over and get it." His father was, as usual, protested, but Olli laughed at him merrily and went. He took with him an auger and a can of water. He hid until it was dark. Then he climbed on the roof of the troll's house and bored a hole right over the bed. And when the troll and his wife went to sleep, he sprinkled some water on the coverlet and on their faces. The troll awoke with a start. "I'm wet," he said, "and the bed's wet too." The old troll wife got up to change the covers. "The roof must be leaking," she said. "It's never leaked before. I suppose it was the last wind." She threw the wet coverlet up over the rafters to dry and put the covers on the bed. When she and the troll were again sleeping, Olli made the hole a little bigger and reached in his hand and got the coverlet from the rafters. The next morning, the troll hallooed over the bay. "Olli! Oh, Olli! Are you there?" "Yes," Olli shouted back. "I'm here. What do you want?" "Have you got my coverlet woven of silk and gold?" "Yes," Olli told him. "I've got your coverlet, but it's my coverlet now." A few days later, Olli said, "There's still one thing in the troll's house that I think I ought to get. It's a golden bell. If I get that golden bell, then there'll be nothing left that had better belong to an honest Finn." Honest. So he went again to the troll's house, taking with him a saw and an auger. He hid until night, and when the troll and his wife were asleep, he cut a hole through the side of the house, through which he reached his hand to get the bell. At the touch of his hand, the bell, ding ding, and woke the troll. The troll jumped out of bed and grabbed Ollie's hand. "Ha ha!" he cried. "I've got you now! This time you won't get away!" Ollie didn't try to get away. He made no resistance while the troll dragged him into the house. "We'll eat him. That's what we'll do," the troll said to his wife. "Heat the oven at once. We'll roast him." So the troll wife built a roaring fire in the oven. "You'll make a fine roast," the troll said, pinching Ollie's arms and legs. "I think we ought to invite the other troll folk to come and help us eat him up. I suppose I just go over the mountain and gather them in. You can manage here without me. As soon as the oven is well heated, just take Ollie and slip him in and close the door. By the time we come, he'll be done." "Very well," the troll wife said, "but don't be too long. He's young and tender and will roast quickly." So the troll went out to invite to the feast the troll folk who lived on the other side of the mountain, and Ollie was left alone with the troll wife. When the oven was well heated, she raked out the coals and said to Ollie, "Now then, my boy, sit down in front of the oven with your back to the opening, and I'll push you in nicely." Ollie pretended he didn't quite understand. He sat down first one way and then another, spreading himself out so large he was too big for the oven door. "Not that way," the troll wife kept saying. "Hunch up a little, straight in front of the door." "You show me how," Ollie begged. So the old troll wife sat down before the oven directly in front of the open. She hunched herself up very compactly with her chin to her knees and her arms around her legs. "Oh, that way," Ollie said, "so that you can just take a hold of me and push me in and shut the door." And as he spoke, he took a hold of her and pushed her in and slammed the door, and that was the end of the old troll's wife. Ollie let her roast in the oven until she was done on a turn. Then he took her out and put her on the table, all ready for the feast. Then he filled a sack with straw and dressed up the sack in some of the old troll wife's clothes, and he threw the dressed-up sack on the bed, and just to glance at it, you'd suppose that was the troll's wife asleep. Then Ollie took the golden bell and went home. Well, presently, the troll and all the troll folk from over the mountain came trooping in. "Yum, yum, it certainly smells good," they said, as they got the first whiff from the big roast on the table. Why was that so separated? "See," the troll said, pointing to the bed, "the old woman's asleep." "Well, let her sleep. She's tired. We'll just sit down without her." And so they too set to and feasted on his own wife. "Ha ha ha!" said the troll. "This is the way you serve a troublesome young Finn." And just then his knife struck something hard, and when he looked down to see what it was, "Mercy me!" he cried. "If this isn't one of the old woman's beads! What can they mean? You don't suppose this roast is not Ollie after all, but the old woman? No, it can't be." He got up and went over to the bed, and then he came back shaking his head sadly. "My friends," he said, "we've been eating the old woman. However, we've eaten so much of her that I suppose we might as well finish her." So the troll folk sat all night feasting and drinking. I don't know. You've stuck it out this long. You're in it now. At dawn, the troll went down to the water and hallooed across. "Ollie! Oh, Ollie! Are you there?" Ollie was safely home and shouted back, "Yes, I'm here. What do you want?" "Have you got my golden bell?" "Yes, I've got your golden bell, but it's my golden bell now." "One thing more, Ollie. Did you roast my old woman?" "Your old woman," Ollie echoed. "Look, is that she?" Ollie pointed at the rising sun, which was coming up behind the troll. The troll turned and looked. He looked straight at the sun, and then, of course, he burst. So that was the end of him. Well, after that, no troll ever dared settle on that side of the mountain. They were all too afraid of that terrible Ollie. So, class, here's a discussion. Who's the hero of that story? Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just Ollie getting revenge, basically, for the troll trying to kill his brothers. But, like, his brothers went there in the first place to try and rob him, so, you know, I don't know. It's very colonialist logic here. If you don't know about the sun thing, by the way, there's a lot of different versions of it, but trolls can't be in the sun. The one that you probably know best is actually, I think, from Icelandic myth more so than just Norse in general, which is the idea that they turn to stone. And you probably know that through Tolkien's work. But, I mean, it basically just comes down to if they're out in the sunlight, they get destroyed. Now, you might be wondering, why would he be out when Ollie went over several times in the middle of the day to do stuff, and the wife had to, you know, keep him busy? Wouldn't he be out in the sun, and wouldn't that, you know, destroy him? And the answer to that is it's a folktale, and you're not supposed to really think that long on the combined logic of events. Yeah, I think we're probably not going to do the third story. I think we just don't have the time, if I'm being honest. It'd probably be like 120 by the time we were done. Maybe 110. So we'll do the Enchanted Grouse next week. Like I said, it was the one that wasn't as thematically appropriate. I hope you enjoyed these stories. I enjoyed them in a sense. I enjoy their insights on like a different ethos, if that makes sense. And here's what I'll say, because we're at the end of the show, and that's usually where I sort of wax philosophical or anthropological or however you want to look at it. In most of these kind of older tales, there are some ideas that basically are taken for granted and unchallenged. And one of the biggest ones, especially from the first story, is the idea that if a person looks ugly, it's because their soul is ugly. Like, bad people look bad, good people look good. And, well, we know that not to be true. That was a really common perspective. And you see that with, you know, the whole bit about how the little sister meets Suyatar in the road, distrusts her based on her looks, thinks that's rude, and that gets her in trouble, right? So the message there is, if you think someone's bad, they're bad. Which is interesting because, like, it's such a trope now in our modern stories that is not the case. And then in that same story, there's a comment about how, like, her goodness, she looked as good as her heart was, or something to that effect. It's sort of taken for granted that if you are of a certain thing, if you have a certain outward appearance, that means internally you're wicked. And you see a little bit of that here, because the opening premise, if I can go back to the beginning of this one, the opening premise of Terrible Olli is the dad says this: "I should think it would shame you, three strong youths, that the wicked old troll over there should live year after year and no one trouble him. We work hard like honest Finns and are as poor at the end of the year as at the beginning. That old troll with all his wickedness grows richer and richer. I tell you, if boys had any real spirits, you'd take his riches from him and drive him away here." Now here's the thing. What exactly does he do that makes him wicked? Like, there's stuff he does later that sort of confirms their suspicions of him. But in terms of his dad making a judgment here, there's nothing really stated as to what is the ill-gotten nature. And the reason why the story doesn't have to do that is because it's sort of taken for granted that trolls, if you were a troll, you were evil. And I think it's interesting because, in a more modern sense, taking Tolkien, who took a lot of influence from these stories, Tolkien kind of plays with this idea a bit with the orcs. If you were an orc, you were evil. There was no sense, like, you could say orcs were a race, but because of how they were made, And, and goblins and all those little variants that he has between the hobbits and the ones that are pulled from the ground and blah, 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 blah. There's variants in there, but he kind of goes back and forth on what they are, whether they're warped elves and whether they're, something else, but whether they're not even really a thing, they're just sort of soil. But he tries to basically come up with a reason why an entire race of creatures is evil. Now, he doesn't really get as bothered by it, but I think we should. We should be concerned with the idea that a story just takes for granted that because it's a troll, it's evil, right? There is lots of writing and stuff that challenges that idea later, because obviously they're talking about mythological creatures, but obviously this thinking is reflective of how the Finns looked at the Nords. I think if you recall, we were reading a Norwegian book last month, and the story that really kicked us off into that book was the Gan Finn, which was a story told from the Norwegian perspective about how the Finns had this evil magic man who just was wicked by his nature. I think it's interesting because it never actually says what's meant by troll here, but I kind of think they might mean like Norwegians. Because the Finns and the Norwegians were very close to each other and had a lot of wars. And so if there was some kid, this Finnish kid, who went and like raided towns until the Norwegians pulled back, you would tell a story about the Terrible Olli, who did the wonderful thing of getting the honest Finns back that gold, or whatever else that should have been theirs. I mention these things not because I think it's absolutely necessary that you think about all of this stuff. You can just enjoy the story. But I think it is fair to point out that, frankly, all art ends up being political in some way. I know some people don't like that idea, but that is absolutely the truth. And fairy and folk tales were quite a bit political, if you didn't know. They were very, very often one of two types. They were either the average working folk in the field who couldn't say anything directly bad about the king, so they characterized their evil king as like a dragon, which is a commonly understood feature of it, that dragons were sort of tyrant kings, and that's why good kings came along and killed them. That was kind of the fantasy king. So there was sort of the working class using it as a way to insult their royalty with coded stories. And then on the flip side, there's these stories that were also basically put out as propaganda pieces to support certain rule and decisions in the princes and kings. And while we're well removed from the actual politics that produced it, so it all seems very hypothetical, theoretical, and metaphorical to us, some of it was pretty substantially focused on like King whoever was actually friends with the fairies, and that's why you should like him and stuff. Like that kind of thing sits at the heart of about half these stories as well. GS says, are parents who needed them to scare their kids into behaving? Yeah. Some of it is about like trying to teach lessons. I think there's less of that than people might think, though, because that's the only thing that ever gets mentioned. It's pretty safe to say that fairy tales are there to teach people lessons, moral lessons to kids. Fairy tales were also there, and in particular folk tales were there as a form of political propaganda. I think it's interesting because it gives me insights on that. I wanted to mention that a lot of this ideology of like, you look evil, you are evil, just be aware that the story is trying to argue for a certain viewpoint of the world that has its roots in a bunch of tribes we no longer really know or are part of, killing each other over mountainsides, right? So, it's more just a thing that I find interesting than anything else. But yeah, I mean, if you ever wonder, like, I don't know what this means or whatever else, just remember it was probably commissioned by somebody or a king or something and then passed about. Anyways, that was Terrible Olli. Next week, maybe we'll get to the Enchanted Grouse and a couple of others. We still have a few more things we can do in this Mighty Miko book. There are other ones that are about as screwed up. Thank you so much for GS and Furl for coming by. And I'm sorry if I messed your name up, by the way. I've been Rory. We have a show on 6:30 on Thursday, which is where we write together. So if you feel like doing that, it's a little more creative and modern. I'll see you Thursday at 6:30. Otherwise, remember to like. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And I'll stoke the fire. Although it's warm enough now, I might have to crack some windows and wave some fans on you as you fall asleep. Have a very good night. I'll keep the window open.